Damien, I know what you did. I remember the way my voice sounded in that moment, low, hoarse, steady. Not like a ghost, not like a threat, more like a verdict that had finally found its way home. On Calder's flagship above me, the music died mid-beat. Even through steel and water, I could feel the shift, like the sea itself had inhaled and stopped halfway. For a second, there was only static, and silence. I pictured him standing there, glass in hand, surrounded by people who believed he was a grieving stepson and not the architect of a mass grave. I imagined the color draining from his face as he heard my voice, a woman he had watched vanish beneath black water and headlines. He thought the ocean had done his dirty work. He never understood who taught me to survive it. I sat in the dim glow of my own vessel, fingers resting lightly on the radio switch, listening to the quiet chaos I had just created. I couldn't see his expression yet, but I didn't need to. I knew Damien well enough to hear his fear in the silence he left behind. Men like him are loud when they feel powerful, truly dangerous when they feel cornered, and almost childlike when they realize they miscalculated a woman they thought was finished. The instruments around me hummed softly. My screens showed the outline of Calder's yacht resting on the still, dark water engines forced into submission. I'd spent months designing that stillness. Tonight, everything was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. I pressed the transmitter again, letting my breath lace the static. Damien, this time, I didn't add anything more. I wanted him to sit with it, with my name in his memory, with the night he chose to drown me for profit and validation. Up there, I knew Calder would be watching him closely. Men like Calder don't like surprises, and they definitely don't like realizing their chosen pawn might have played them too. In the end, that was the beauty of this moment. For the first time since the Aurelia went down, I wasn't the one trapped in the dark. They were, and the night had only just begun making them feel it. What they did next would tell me exactly how much they'd learned, and how much further I'd have to go to break them. The moment my second transmission cut out, I leaned back in my seat and listened, not to the ocean, not to the hum of my vessel, but to the silence on their end of the line. Silence can be a confession if you know how to hear it, and Damien's silence was screaming. The flagship above me drifted a few meters off course, just enough for me to feel its weight shift through the water. He must have moved, stumbled, maybe. Fear changes the center of gravity in a man like him. I imagined his hand hovering over the console, shaking, trying to find an explanation that didn't involve me being alive. I imagined Calder beside him, eyes narrowed, calculating, offended, curious. He'd built his empire on predicting other people's moves, but tonight he was standing on a chessboard he didn't even know existed. I tapped a small monitor, zooming in on the underside of their hull. The sensors showed increased motion. People were gathering, whispering, circling Damien like moths drawn to a flame that suddenly burned the wrong color. He would hate that, being watched when he wasn't in control. A faint sound crept through my receiver, someone tapping the mic on their end. Not speaking, testing. They still didn't know where I was. Good. I kept my breathing slow, steady. That was something the ocean taught me long before sabotage ever entered my life. The power of stillness. Stillness draws truth to the surface like salt rising on skin. Then Calder's voice finally came through, low and brittle at the edges. Identify yourself, I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Calder always phrased his questions like commands. It made him feel bigger in a room, but on the radio, stripped of his stage, he sounded exactly like what he was. A man who had lost control of his narrative. I didn't answer, not yet. Instead, I let the quiet sit between us like a third presence, one that neither of them could dominate. On my screen, the flagship's interior lights flickered. Damien had tried to restart the engines. He didn't realize I'd locked him into the stillness he feared most. Only then did I lift the transmitter, my fingers steady on the switch. If he wanted to hear a ghost, I would let him. But what I was now wasn't a ghost. I was the consequence he never calculated. and the next words I spoke would unravel him faster than the sinking of any ship. I waited long enough for their anxiety to ripen, long enough for Damien's breathing to turn sharp, uneven, desperate. When I finally pressed the transmitter again, I didn't speak immediately. I let the sound of my breath move through the line. Soft, intimate, living, the kind of sound a dead woman shouldn't make. Someone near Damien gasped. I heard the faint scuff of a shoe against polished flooring. Even through interference, fear has a texture, a pulse. It's unmistakable. Calder tried to mask it with authority. Say your name, he ordered. But it wasn't him I was speaking to tonight. Damien, I said, letting the syllables fall like quiet stones in still water. You left something unfinished, a rustle fabric shifting, maybe a glass knocking over. I imagined him stepping back from the console, a man caught between disbelief and dread. He managed a whisper. It can't be you. I didn't answer. Some truths don't need confirmation. They need time to bloom inside the guilty. Above me, the yacht shuddered faintly as more passengers drifted toward the lounge. Damien would hate their eyes on him. For months he had performed grief like a rehearsed monologue, and now the script was slipping from his hands. I watched their thermal signatures gathering on my monitor, a growing cluster of heat and panic. He wasn't just losing control, he was losing the room. Calder stepped closer to the mic, but I could hear it in the way the air around him shifted. This wasn't concern. This was evaluation, recognition. He was realizing he might be standing beside a liability disguised as an heir. Whoever you are, Calder said, you're toying with a dangerous situation. I exhaled softly. I'm not toying, I murmured. I'm reminding. A tremor entered Damien's voice. What do you want? Finally, the question I'd been waiting for. But wanting is not how revenge works. Wanting is loud, reactive, frantic. What I carried wasn't wanting, it was knowledge, patience, and a truth that could drown an empire. I want you to listen, I said. Then I cut the line. Abrupt, surgical, final. I knew what silence would do to him. I knew what questions it would start feeding him. Because I could feel the shift even from beneath the surface. He had just realized the one thing he never prepared for. I wasn't hunting him. I was guiding him. And the place I was leading him to was the last place he ever wanted to return. For a long moment after I severed the signal, I listened not to their voices, but to the movements they couldn't hide. On my instruments, the heat signatures above shifted in jagged, frantic patterns. Fear makes people unpredictable. Guilt makes them transparent. Damien moved first. Sharp steps, uneven breath, a man trying to recover his dignity before it slipped through his fingers. What was that? Someone whispered near him. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was too loud. Calder, on the other hand, didn't pace. He didn't shake. He stood still to still. The kind of stillness that meant he was watching Damien the way a wolf watches an injured packmate. Not with sympathy, with calculation. I tapped my console, isolating their audio again. Calder's voice came through, quiet but edged like a blade drawn halfway. Why did she say your name? Damien inhaled sharply. I don't know. It's a trick. Someone who sounds exactly like Arlena Voss. Calder asked. There it was. My name. Spoken aloud in a room where they once held a memorial for me. Damien flinched as if the syllables had reached into his spine. She's dead, he insisted. You saw the footage. You saw the wreck. Calder cut him off. I saw what I was meant to see, that silence afterward. That silence was the beginning of the unraveling. Above me, the flagship drifted slightly starboard, a subtle shift, but enough to tell me Damien had moved toward the windows, looking out into the black water as if expecting my face to rise through it. I didn't give him that comfort. Let imagination do the work. I angled my vessel a few degrees, letting the faintest hum vibrate through their hull. A whisper of movement, a ghost of presence, enough for the guests to panic, for murmurs to bloom into speculation. Damien hissed at someone, "Stop staring. There's nothing out there," but his voice trembled. Calder heard it too. He stepped closer, lowering his tone. "What did you do?" he asked. Damien swallowed, loud enough that even my receiver caught it. "Nothing. I didn't. This isn't. It wasn't supposed to." He cut himself off, realizing what he was admitting. I leaned closer to my microphone, even though I wasn't transmitting. Old habits, old wounds. Damien had always struggled with the edges of truth. Tonight, those edges were finally cutting back. Up above, Calder's footsteps shifted, slow, deliberate, approaching the control console. I imagined his finger hovering over the radio switch, hesitant and heavy, as if the plastic beneath it might burn. "Arlena," he called into the room, as though testing the air for ghosts. "If you're out there, say something." I didn't. "Not yet." Let him taste doubt. Let Damien drown in it. Stillness can be a blade if you learn how to hold it. And the next sound they heard would carve far deeper than my voice ever could. The next sound they heard wasn't my voice. It was metal, slow, deliberate, and close. A scrape along the underside of Calder's flagship, subtle enough to question, loud enough to fear. Like a fingertip dragging across a sealed envelope, one that was never meant to be opened. I watched them react on my heat map. Every silhouette jerked. Every heartbeat rose. Every lie they'd told themselves collided with the possibility of truth. Damien cursed under his breath, stumbling backward. What was that? I smiled to myself. He remembered that sound. Years ago, when I built this vessel, I tested its hull sensors using that very motion, a slow scrape, to simulate an object approaching undetected. Damien had seen me demonstrate it once, annoyed that I prioritized paranoia over spectacle. Now paranoia was the only language he understood. Calder, however, stayed unnervingly calm. He stepped toward the window, hands clasped behind his back, posture straight. But tension reveals itself in small places. His jaw locked tight, his breathing measured too carefully. "What are you doing, Arlena?" he murmured, not into the radio, but to the sea itself. I heard the words through vibration sensors, the syllables traveling through the hull like soft knocks. A question not meant for me but meant because of me. Damien rushed beside him. "She's dead," he snapped, voice trembling. The body was never recovered because the ocean, he couldn't finish. He didn't want to say it, because he ensured it vanished. Calder turned his head, eyes sliding toward Damien with the quiet cruelty of a man connecting dots he had once chosen to ignore. "You seem very committed to her being dead," Calder said. "Almost." "Invested." Damien froze. The guests kept their distance, whispering in terrified spirals. They didn't know the history yet, but fear sharpens intuition. They saw guilt. They saw panic. They saw a man cracking open. And even from below, I felt the moment Calder stopped suspending disbelief. He no longer wondered whether I could be alive. He wondered what I knew. I let the scraping stop abruptly. Let silence snap back into the hull like a recoiling breath. Then I shifted my vessel just enough for a low, resonant hum to pulse through the water, a frequency only two living people would recognize. Damien and me. Our old emergency code. 3 tones. Even, measured, undeniable. Calder whispered, "You know that signal, don't you?" Damien said nothing, but his body answered for him. Shoulders sinking, spine curling, breath stuttering. In the darkness of my cockpit, I closed my eyes for a moment, not out of mercy, but memory. This was the point where he used to break during training. Not from pain, from truth. So I gave him one more reminder. I tapped the transmitter, kept my voice low, almost gentle. "You hear me, Damien?" "You always did." Above me, someone screamed. And in that instant, I knew their story, the one they crafted for the world, was finally starting to fracture. The scream upstairs dissolved into frantic shuffling, heels scraping, glasses rattling, bodies pressing toward the walls. Fear moves people faster than any engine ever could. My monitors lit up with the chaos, heat signatures jolting in every direction, Damien's especially frantic, pulsing like a trapped animal. Calder's remained still. He was watching, listening, absorbing. He spoke first, his voice a low current cutting through the rising panic. Damien, explain why she knows that signal. Damien didn't answer right away. He backed into a table, knocking over a decanter, the sound exploding across the room. It doesn't mean anything. It's just interference. It's 3 tones, Calder interrupted, eyes narrowing. Even spacing. Deliberate pattern, a pause, sharp and painful. That was Arlena's distress confirmation code, wasn't it? Damien's breath fractured. Calder, please, he was unraveling quicker than I expected. I leaned closer to my console, letting my vessel drift under their hull again. Slow enough to mimic a shadow. Close enough for the sonar to pick up the tight, shallow rhythm of his panic. He'd betrayed me with calculation. But fear made him honest. The radio crackled suddenly, not with my voice, not yet, but with a faint recording filtered through layers of static. A voice from months ago. A voice I remembered hearing right before the water rushed in. Damien's voice. Just make it look mechanical. No alarms. No trace. The room above me went dead still. It wasn't the whole recording, not yet. Just enough for the truth to start whispering through their defenses. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered my name like a prayer or a warning. Calder's tone shifted, quiet but lethal. You were below deck that night. Damien stepped back again, bumping into a chair. You don't understand, you weren't there, Calder. This is being manipulated. He reached for the radio panel with shaking hands. His instincts had never failed him faster. The radio cut out abruptly after just a few seconds of audio. He'd smashed the controls cowardly, desperate. But destroying evidence doesn't erase guilt. It only highlights who fears the truth. Calder didn't move. He didn't even blink. Tell me, Damien, why would someone accusing you of sabotage have access to your voice? Damien's chest rose and fell like he'd been running, even though he was trapped on still water. I don't know, he whispered. I don't know how anyone could have it. A lie doesn't tremble. But he did. I let the silence breathe between us again, settling like a weight on their shoulders. The kind that makes even innocent people uneasy and guilty ones collapse. Then I pressed the transmitter, my voice a measured blade. Ask him, I said softly. Ask him where he was when the Aurelia took her first breath of water. Calder turned slowly toward Damien, so slowly it felt like the whole room leaned with him. Damien stumbled backward, eyes wide, voice cracking like old glass. Don't listen to her, but it was already too late. Because the next truth I revealed would make Calder realize he hadn't partnered with an heir. He'd partnered with a saboteur. And by the time he understood that, it would already be too late. Calder didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His silence was sharper than any confrontation, and Damien felt every inch of it. He backed away until the back of his knees hit one of the leather sofas, and even then he kept trying to retreat, as though distance could undo what I'd just begun to unravel. Where were you? Calder asked quietly, when the Aurelia started to sink. The question hung in the air like a blade suspended by a single thread. Damien's lips parted, but the first sound that escaped wasn't a word, it was a pulse of breath, ragged and thin, the kind that belongs to someone realizing they misjudged not one enemy, but 2. I told the investigators. Investigators? Calder murmured. Yes, and you fooled them easily. Grief is a convenient veil. His eyes hardened. But you forget who I am. Damien's heart rate spiked so violently that my sensors buzzed with the change. Above me, the room shifted. People began stepping back from him, creating a widening circle of suspicion. Luxury has a funny way of dissolving when the truth enters the room. Alliances evaporate, reputations crack, and every whispered doubt resurfaces, hungry for confirmation. Damien held up both hands, palms trembling. Calder, listen, whatever she's saying, she's manipulating you. It's a trick, but fear hollows the voice of a liar. It exposes him in ways even evidence can't. I pressed the transmitter again, my tone soft enough to make the silence lean in. Tell him about the surge, Damien. The word alone hit him like a physical blow. Because we both knew what the surge meant. He knew it wasn't public knowledge. He knew only someone who had been on the Aurelia's control deck that night could mention it. And he knew I had been nowhere near that deck when the water swallowed half the vessel. His voice fell into a broken whisper. Arlena, stop. Calder's gaze sharpened with new interest. What surge? Damien closed his eyes, just for a moment long enough to reveal the truth he was scrambling to hide. His mind was racing backward through memories he prayed had died with me and the Aurelia. The surge, the intentional override, the click of the stabilizer panel being forced into violation mode. When Damien didn't answer, I answered for him. You triggered it, I said. 3 minutes before the breach, gasps surged through the lounge. Someone whispered, my God. Calder stared at Damien with a stillness that vibrated with calculation and betrayal. You caused it, no. Damien snapped to fast, to loud. I didn't cause anything. She's twisting, she's lying, she can't know any of that. His panic betrayed him more effectively than I ever could. Calder leaned forward, voice low and dangerous. Damien, how could she know something that was never in the official reports? Damien's mouth opened and closed, no sound forming. There were no more lies available to him, only desperation. I rested my hand on my console, steady and patient. I had spent months preparing for this moment, shaping every detail as meticulously as carving a message into stone. Damien, I said softly, I told you once that the ocean keeps its own records. Up on the yacht, he looked toward the windows again, toward the water. He finally began to understand. But the next thing I showed them wouldn't just reveal guilt. It would reveal intent. And once intent surfaced, there would be no saving him. The shift above me was immediate, almost visible even through steel and distance. Calder stepped back from Damien as though the truth had a physical temperature, something scorching, something dangerous enough to burn by proximity alone. Intent. That was the word they were all afraid of. Accidents ruin reputations. Intent ruins lives. Damien wiped a trembling hand across his mouth, but panic makes gestures clumsy. He only smeared the sweat on his face, leaving him looking more hunted, more cornered, more exposed. There was no surge, he choked. Arlena this is some kind of sick joke. I let him unravel. He'd hidden behind performance for so long that I wanted him to feel what existed beneath it. The hollow echo of a man who thought ambition made him powerful. It never did. It only made him sloppy. Calder, meanwhile, studied him with a new awareness, one he could no longer unsee. His voice dropped into something calm and lethal. What exactly, Calder asked, did you do below deck? Damien froze. He wasn't expecting the directness. He wasn't expecting the room to turn quiet enough to hear his breath break. Nothing. I didn't, Damien. Calder's tone sharpened. Do not mistake me for a fool. If she knows details that were never disclosed, then someone was down there who shouldn't have been. Someone. A word that sliced through Damien with surgical precision. I allowed myself a single breath before pressing the transmitter again. This time, I didn't speak. I played the next recording. The room above me fell into a silence too complete to be natural. And then Damien's voice filled the yacht. Lock the secondary controls. Override the stabilizers. Keep the cameras down for 30 minutes. The recording was crisp, undeniable. His tone was confident, impatient, nothing like the terrified man now trembling in the lounge. A second voice responded. Sir, that'll trigger a surge, that's the point. Damien snapped in the recording. Just do it. It needs to look like a mechanical failure. The playback ended with a soft click, a small, ordinary sound that felt like a guillotine finding its rest. The silence afterward was not shock. It was recognition. Calder stared at Damien as if finally seeing the man he'd chosen to align himself with. A liability dressed as an heir. A saboteur wrapped in grief. Damien shook his head violently. No, this is edited. Arlena is framing me, she's setting me up, but he wasn't pleading his innocence. He was pleading for his narrative, and even he could hear the difference. From my seat below, I watched the thermal signatures shift once more, people stepping away from him, as though guilt might be contagious. Calder's voice dropped into something colder than the sea itself. You murdered them, Damien staggered, words strangled in his throat. I didn't, Calder. You pushed me into this, your men, your promise, There it was. The crack in their alliance. The fracture he couldn't seal, even if he'd planned for it. I leaned forward, letting myself savor the moment not with triumph, but with the quiet gravity of someone who had waited long enough to let the truth breathe. They were turning on each other, predictably, beautifully, and the best part, I hadn't even shown them the real evidence yet. What surfaced next would not only damn Damien, it would make Calder realize his own reckoning had already begun. To keep the pacing smooth and the narrative continuous, I will proceed with Part 9 exactly where Part 8 ended. If you did want a rewritten alternate Part 8 instead, just tell me, I can generate that too. Calder didn't deny Damien's accusation. He didn't defend himself. He didn't even blink. That was how I knew the moment had finally arrived, the one where the predator realizes the prey he cultivated has become a liability. Calder Haynes knew how to abandon a sinking asset. He'd done it to partners, rivals, and entire companies. And tonight, he added Damien to that list with the cold efficiency of a man cutting loose a lifeboat that couldn't stay afloat. Your problem, Calder murmured, is that you speak before thinking. Damien recoiled as if struck. You promised me protection, you promised me a future. Calder's gaze hardened. I promised you opportunity, not immunity. Above me, tension curled through the lounge like smoke, thick and suffocating. Damien's panic sharpened. Calder's restraint deepened. The watching guests leaned away from Damien as if guilt radiated heat. And then, before Damien could spit out another excuse, I played the next piece of truth. A soft click. A video feed, muted at first, just the thrum of machinery and the warbled audio from a below-deck camera the night the Aurelia died. Not destroyed, not corrupted, recovered, restored. On the screen, the timestamp glowed faintly. The image flickered, stabilizing into view. Two figures in the lower corridor, shadows hunched over the stabilizer panel. Damien, and one of Calder's men. Gasps erupted above me, sharp, fractured, horrified. The audio kicked in next. Damien's voice, clear, certain, not a victim, not a pawn, a conspirator. Open the relay. Once it surges, we're covered. Calder will take the rest. Calder's jaw tightened not with shock, but with the realization that his own name was now buried in a grave he thought he'd built for me. Turn it off. Damien screamed suddenly, shattering beneath the weight of his own face on the screen. Turn it off, turn it off. But the video kept playing. His voice kept echoing. His intent kept surfacing. He lunged for the console. Someone grabbed his arm. He broke free. His voice cracked into something primal: fear, rage, the last breath of a lie collapsing under gravity. Calder's tone, when he finally spoke, was almost quiet. You dragged me into this. Damien shook his head violently. You said you'd handle the aftermath. You said she'd never survive, and there it was. The confession he'd spent months pretending he never spoke. I pressed the transmitter again, my voice steady as the sea beneath them. You should have known better than to plan a murder on a vessel I designed. Damien froze. Calder turned sharply. The room tilted with the weight of my truth. Because the Aurelia was my creation. Every deck, every corridor, every system, and every hidden failsafe they had no idea existed. I exhaled slowly, letting them hear the composure that outlived their betrayal. I built her to protect my guests, I said. I just never expected she'd be protecting me from both of you. Above me, the blackout lights flickered as if the ocean itself was listening. And the next revelation would make Calder realize that justice wasn't coming for Damien alone. It was coming for him as well. Calder was the first to understand what my words truly meant. Not the guilt, not the recordings, not even the proof of Damien's sabotage. What terrified him was the realization that I had been preparing for this long before either man plotted to erase me. On my vessel, I activated the next sequence: not evidence, not a recording, but something far simpler: the Aurelia's original command key. A slender black device, unremarkable unless you knew what it unlocked. Calder knew. Damien definitely knew. Above me, their heat signatures recoiled at the same moment, a synchronized pulse of dread. Damien's voice cracked first. That's impossible, you destroyed that. I watched it go down with the ship. I pressed the transmitter, letting quiet authority fill the channel. I never store critical systems in one place. You underestimated the woman who built the fleet you tried to steal. Calder's voice dropped, low and precise. You're telling me you backed every surveillance file? Every file, I said. And every transaction your men used to fund Damien's sabotage. The room exploded not in noise, but in breathless disbelief. Gasps, shuffling feet, a whispered curse. Damien sagged forward, clutching his hair with both hands as though the truth were physically crushing him. You can't upload that, he rasped. Arlena, you'll destroy everything. Your company, your legacy. No, I murmured. My legacy was destroyed the moment you decided to drown it. I uploaded the data key into my navigation panel. The system recognized its creator instantly. Authentication. Voss, valid transmission ready. Calder's mask finally cracked. Not with fear, with respect. The dangerous kind. You planned for betrayal, he said quietly. Even from him. I hoped I wouldn't need it, I replied. But hope isn't a business strategy. Damien lunged again, wild with panic. Stop this. You don't understand. Once that goes public, once they see, I cut him off gently. Once they see, the truth will finally breathe. Above me, someone shouted for security. Someone else cursed Calder's name. The elite, those used to controlling every outcome, were witnessing something they couldn't touch or spin. Justice. Measured. Inevitable. I lifted my finger toward the final command. Damien must have sensed the moment, because his scream tore through the channel like a fraying rope. Arlena, please, a beat of stillness, as deep as the water around us. Then I spoke the words I'd waited months to deliver. The ocean keeps receipts, Damien. And tonight, so do I. I sent the transmission. Above me, the flagship's screens flashed white, then silver, then cold, damning clarity as the files began to upload to every maritime authority within range. Calder staggered back. Damien collapsed. The room fractured. And I sat in the quiet glow of my vessel, steady as tide. What happened next would not be loud, but it would be final. And they had no idea how far the consequences would reach. The moment the transmission left my vessel, the sea felt different, not louder, not rougher, just aware, as if it understood the weight. I'd returned to it, the balance restored, the truth finally freed from the depths where they tried to bury it with me. Above me, the flagship erupted, not in panic, in realization, the kind that tears through a room quietly, like a wall of water moving beneath the surface before anyone sees the wave. I heard someone choke out, "My God, this ruins them both." Another murmured, "This changes everything," and Calder didn't speak at all. I watched him through thermal imaging, still, rigid, calculating the exact second his empire began to tilt beneath his feet. He wasn't afraid of guilt. He wasn't afraid of exposure. He was afraid of losing control. Damien, on the other hand, had already lost it. He clawed at the console, hitting buttons like a man trying to hold onto something already sinking through his fingers. "You don't understand," he gasped. "This wasn't supposed to happen, Arlena. Please undo it, undo it, undo it." As if truth were a switch someone could flip on command. He slammed his palm against the screen, watched the progress bar fill anyway, and dissolved completely. The cry he let out wasn't anger. It wasn't even guilt. It was grief. Grief for the life he'd stolen. Grief for the future he'd built on bones. Calder finally spoke, voice stripped to its steel. "You implicated me." Damien looked at him with shaking disbelief. "You promised." "I promised nothing," Calder said. "And now we're both drowning because of your incompetence." He said it coldly, openly, in front of the entire room. It was the kind of betrayal Damien had practiced his whole life, now being delivered to him with perfect symmetry. For the first time, I let myself feel the echo of something almost like sorrow. Not for Damien but for the innocence he once had before ambition hollowed him out. Some tragedies begin long before the crime. The flagship jolted suddenly, a sharp, metallic shudder that vibrated through every floorboard. Damien screamed. Calder grabbed a railing. Guests stumbled into furniture. But I knew that sound. It wasn't danger. It was the ignition of their emergency lockdown system triggered by the incoming broadcast confirmations from international authorities. Protocols they themselves had agreed to. Systems they never expected to be used against them. From my vessel below, I watched the security shutters descend over their windows. Automatic, unstoppable, a cocoon of consequences. They were trapped inside a version of truth they could no longer escape. I pressed the transmitter once more, letting my voice settle through the hull with calm finality. Tonight isn't about punishment, I said quietly. It's about alignment. The world is finally seeing you as I did, Damien sobbed. Calder stayed silent. And this, I added, is only the beginning, because while the transmission had destroyed their empires, the fallout was going to destroy their legacies. And by the time dawn reached the water, they would both understand that surviving the night was not the same as surviving the truth. When the shutters locked, the flagship went quiet, not with peace, not with acceptance, but with the helpless stillness of men who finally understood that the world they forged from arrogance and secrecy had cracked open beneath them. Damien slid to the floor, hands over his face, as if he could hide from the truth now illuminating every screen around him. Calder stood rigid, a statue carved out of the last seconds before a storm erases the shore. He didn't beg, he didn't rage, but his silence carried the weight of a man calculating the ruins of everything he once controlled. I watched them without triumph. Revenge doesn't need celebration, it only needs clarity. And clarity, tonight, was absolute. The final confirmation pinged across my dashboard. Evidence delivered. Global Maritime Council. Received. It was done. Not the noise, not the spectacle, the truth itself. Unspinnable, unavoidable, irreversible. Damien lifted his head slowly, eyes red and hollow. He wasn't looking at the screens anymore. He was looking at his reflection in the glossy console before him, the reflection of a man who had gambled his soul for an empire and lost both. Arlena, he whispered into the dead radio. I never meant, I just wanted. You had everything. His voice cracked into something small, something human, something that would have moved me once, long before his ambition turned me into collateral. I didn't answer. Some truths require silence. Some goodbyes don't need sound. Calder finally spoke, and his tone carried none of the power he once commanded. What now? A simple question. A man stripped bare. I pressed the transmitter, letting the sea's calm steadiness thread through my voice. Now you face the world you created, I said. A world where truth rises even from the deepest water. Above me, the flagship drifted without direction, its engines still locked, its lights dimmed, its future sinking in slow, quiet increments, much like the Aurelia had that night. Only this time, the right things were drowning. I powered up my vessel, feeling the hum vibrate through my bones, a reminder that I had survived what they intended to bury me in. And not only survived, but returned with enough truth to reshape the tide. For the first time in months, I let myself exhale, not with control but with release. As I eased away into the dark water, I gave them one final message, the kind that lingers long after the voice fades. Some storms come to destroy, I said softly, but some come to reveal. I cut the transmission for the last time. The ocean opened before me, vast, quiet, endless, and for the first time since the night they tried to take my life, it felt like an ally again. The sky above their trapped yacht began to lighten, just the faintest blue brushing the edge of night. And as dawn touched the water, the truth settled into place. They had called me gone. They had called me forgotten. But now they will never outlive my name.